Right. And like this is making me think of how like you have Althusser, who's basically the big kind of anti-Marxist humanism
Hmm.
Marxist, because
Yeah.
he was very much like a structuralist with his,
Yeah.
and with his theories of ideology and everything like that.
Hmm.
Um, but it honestly seems like there's not really that much of a confliction between that. Like, if we read Marx in this way, as and Sartre obviously as like they're not talking about some ideal form of what a human is. They're talking about like actually existing humanity and the consciousness of human beings, basically. Um,
Yeah.
but there could possibly be a distinction um, between them in the sense that like the old like there's this debate everywhere like between all sort of schools of thought kind of like structural factors versus the agency of people and like which one is more important because
Hmm.
it seems like Sartre is very like anti-deterministic. He's like as far as I can tell
Hmm.
to the point where he basically is positing that if we all came to this, as you put it, existential insight, and we had like a clear alternative, we could build a different world than this. Whereas I
Hmm.
think someone like Althusser would probably say like things are too determined, the structures are too big, it's not really about any individual's agency. And that argument kind of has resonance as well because
Yeah.
like Foucault says in the Chomsky debate, like we reproduce our social circumstances. And I've put this together to basically mean like even when you try to build an alternative to capitalism, there will still be some aspects of the society from
I guess left
before
behind.
that you
Yep.
will be rebuilding basically. And so
Yeah.
like where do we stand in this the balance of these factors is interesting.
Yeah, that's a good kind of question. I think I can try to tackle it by moving through some of the philosophical threads that you bring up. So, with the determinism aspect of Sartre's philosophy, he has a. I wish I had the part on hand, but there's a part in the introductory periods, I should say, like in the first 100 pages of being in nothingness, where he does explicitly address the determinists, um, and people who would kind of take on a more determinist outlook of the world. And I think one of the things that he tries to do, and he kind of from like, even though he's talking about freedom, like he's not super duper involved. And I noticed that he doesn't really get brought up a lot in debates about determinism, compatibilism, and free will. Um, but but the big thing that I take away in terms of his determinism stuff and his responses to determinism is that when he talks about freedom, he's talking about freedom to act, and freedom to engage with the world, not freedom of outcome, which is big. And I think a lot of people should take that into consideration when they're thinking about what Sartre says about freedom, and anybody who talks about freedom. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear people think about freedom or talk about freedom, one of their big assumptions is, oh, well, is X person free to save themselves from insert extremely difficult and emotionally stressing situation. That's not what Sartre's talking about. What he's talking about is the multiplicity of actions that are available at any given moment of our experience, not whether or not they will kind of, you know, um, see to it the outcome you want. Now, I think there are ways that certain actions are, in not inevitable. I don't want to say inevitable. Some actions are more likely to lead to the outcomes you want, right? So like, if you're doing something that has a 90% chance and you do it, because it has a 90% chance, you kind of do it because you most likely intend that it'll happen. And I think the point, and I am not one of the individuals or types of Marxists that think communism is inevitable. Um,
Right.
I don't do that. I don't think that's a smart move. And I don't think Sartre wants to do that either. And it's a big thing that he talks about with freedom. But what I think does make itself, what I think does make communism or socialism more likely is if people kind of embrace their existence as free beings, because they kind of recognize the way that they're getting a raw deal under capitalism. Um,
And
but I
from
think,
that
yeah,
perspective,
yeah. But
would you say that like after that revelation, would you say that like communism or something like that would always be potential? Like there's always a possibility that we could move that way?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's what gets disclosed to the person. And this is one of the big reasons why I think there should be a kind of coalescence between Sartre's theories and Marx's, is because Marx Marx is, there is definitely a degree of individualism in Marx, and I think far too often people just throw off Marxism as pure collectivism, and the opposite is true for Sartre, that people think he that existentialism, or his idea of freedom, is extremely individualistic and it doesn't embrace the collective. Both of these things together, I think, kind of highlight the ways both of these thinkers are talking about both of those things and doing them quite well. Because I think um, the individual revelation, right? And I think I talked to someone about this in regards to stuff like unionizing or union efforts. The individual revelation that my existence as a free being is, not only um, the most important thing for me to define my experience, but is something that I want to value. That individual revelation is something that I think the individual can then disclose to others, that, hey, this is our this is who we are as human beings, or this is kind of how we can think of ourselves as human beings, and this is why this is important for us, and this is why we should kind of try to run away, or not run away, try to address, not run away, sorry, address a system like capitalism and address it effectively, because we're not getting the we're not reproducing, to kind of use the language you were talking about with the Foucault and Chomsky debate, is that you know we're not reproducing a society that reflects who we are and what we exist to do.
Yeah. It's yeah.